Razzle-dazzle in virtual interviews right now on the Leadership Voice. Welcome to the Leadership Voice. I'm your host, Jay Barbuto. Today's episode is about succeeding in virtual interviews. Joining us today will be Greg Hauser, who brings 16 years of recruiting experience at Citigroup, Broadcom, CoreLogic, and is currently the Executive Director of Global Talent Acquisition at Ingram Micro. Please welcome my good friend, Greg Hauser.
Hey, Jay. Happy to be here.
Greg, thanks for being here on the show today to share your wisdom and thoughts around interviewing, especially in this virtual setting that we're in.
Absolutely. I'm happy to share.
Maybe we could start off by talking about the different types of virtual interviews.
Absolutely. So we can really start at the beginning of the interview process. When an application is submitted to a company, virtual interviewing can actually start right there. We utilize technologies in our recruiting at Ingram Micro that actually start the screening process via text messaging and an SMS. So we use a chat bot that actually interacts with the candidate in a virtual setting, even before a one-on-one conversation with an associate at the organization. So really, virtual interviewing starts as soon as you click apply. Once the application process begins, virtual interviewing now will have a number of different components. Some companies utilize a phone, just a regular phone conversation. So not necessarily being on video, but calling and talking just as a normal phone screen would be. There could be a two-way virtual interview, much like what we're doing today, Jay, you and I, where you're interviewing me. That's a two-way. But companies also have one-way interviews, which basically means they set up a virtual interview setting with already, questions that have already been identified that they would ask you. And they would ask you to record those questions or your answers to those questions as part of the interview process. Now, some of those don't allow the opportunity to re-record your answers, but some do. So I want to make sure that when we cover some of the to-dos and tricks and tips, that you understand what type of interview format you're going into before you jump online and before you start the process.
So are there things that people should be thinking about? If, for example, if they're interviewing with a bot, are there things they should be trying to make sure they say? Are there keywords? Is there an actual set of skills that a person needs to have at succeeding in that kind of environment?
Well, I think the good thing, Jay, is that your students already have the skills to do well in a text message interview. We're in the world today of text messaging and instant gratification. So I think that is actually a skill that this generation has a strength when interacting with the company. But what I would suggest is during the interaction, answer the questions to the best of your ability, be honest through the process, and make sure that you're clear with your responses and answers. Now, the reason I say that is you might know that you're interacting with a virtual assistant or a chat bot, but we record every interaction that occurs in that meeting, which basically means we have a script or a transcript of your interaction with the chatbot. Every question you're asked, every response. So we do look at things like spelling and grammar and how you interacted in that conversation. Because in this day and age, the interaction we have with customers can be virtual as well, meaning if you're in a customer service or support role or even a sales support role, when you're interacting with a customer, you do need to send them digital messages, whether that's through text, whether that's through a chat online or email. And your communication skills can certainly come out in a conversation that you're having with the company through the chatbot. So I would just say that obviously answer the questions to the best of your ability, but make sure you realize this is part of the interview process and we'll be looking at it.
So when we talk about succeeding in this type of environment, are there any tips that you might have for folks to optimize their chances?
Even though we're in a virtual environment, the same tips about landing an interview stay, consistent, whether that's virtual, whether that we're back to what was the normal. Interacting with a company and getting an interview, the same tactics apply regardless of the scenario. Now, there are some tips once you have the interaction and once you're granted a virtual interview that we'll talk about that will, maybe it will increase your chances. It'll certainly not eliminate you quickly because the interviewer or however the situation was, it won't necessarily disqualify you from continuing on, but it really will put you in a good situation or a good position to have a good shot at that job or that opportunity. So a couple of things, obviously we already touched upon the text messaging feature, but if you are having an interview, the number one thing is just to ask about the format, right? Asking more questions is okay. Asking who you're going to be speaking with, if there is a number of different conversations you're going to be having, do your research, understand the company, what they do, understand who the people you're speaking with. And that could be researching them on LinkedIn. Everyone has LinkedIn now for the most part. Doing a Google search on that person's name, see if there's any articles or anything else that's been published about that person that you can get to know them. Because interviewing is about making a connection. It's about showing what you're capable of doing, but it's also making a connection. You are interviewing the company's interviewing you. And so the more research you do and the more information you find, the better you will be assessing whether or not this is a role that you'll be interested in pursuing, as well as giving you the right, leverage when you're describing what you do and what you bring to the table and why this company should select you over somebody else. So that would be the first part, doing the research, doing the homework, and then understanding who you're talking to. The next step, especially if it falls into one of those categories I mentioned, whether it's an interview, a face-to-face virtual interview, or a one interview where you're taking a test or answering questions and recording your responses, is to practice, right? I think people just automatically assume you just jump onto a video and you go, right? And the reality is the more you're in front of this virtual medium that we're in today, the better you'll present yourself. So how do you practice? Well, number one, do your homework about what type of lighting works best in a virtual interview setting, which in this case, natural lighting. If I was to turn my camera around, Jay, you'd see a window right behind me or right in front of me. The natural light is the best light for presenting yourself on a video. Maybe do a test call with your friends or your family, right? I think nowadays, more than ever, we are connecting with our family members on Zoom. In fact, for Mother's Day yesterday, we did a Zoom call with my extended family and we played bingo across the US. But while we're playing that game, it gives you an opportunity to continue to practice, if you will, ask questions, engage with someone else that's thousands of miles away from you, because that confidence will carry with you during an interview process. And so practice makes perfect, and failing to prepare is preparing to fail. So practice doing that. Ask yourself different questions. Understand the interview process. Jay, I can go on and on and on about the whole interview, but a lot of this stuff has to do with researching and understanding what the process really is and asking questions before you engage in the interview.
And so are there things that a person could do during a virtual interview that will actually kill their chances or really weaken their prospects of earning a position?
I don't think it would, I don't use the word kill in any, but I think there are things you can do that will make you stand out. Obviously, you can tell if someone's prepared for the interview, right? Are they dressed like they're ready to work, right? And here's the deal: you can ask the company what is their work attire. Now, a lot of companies now are very relaxed because we're in a virtual setting, but if we weren't in a virtual setting and we do return to work, which we will, what is the dress attire? You want to make sure that you're dressing for the part that you're going to be playing in the organization and that you're taking it seriously. So yes, I have a collared shirt on, understanding that in a video interview as well, solid colors, don't distract the person that you're speaking with or your audience, as well as the background, right? My background is fairly solid. I mean, you're looking at the door to this room and the closet, but it's solid. It's not striped or crazy colors. Or the other things I've seen people do is blur out the background or put up different backgrounds that you can do with Zoom and Microsoft Teams and everything else. But that's a distraction. You want to limit the distraction as much as possible, because if that's distracting, they're not listening to what you're saying, or maybe they didn't pick up on something important you wanted to convey during that discussion. So I think if some of those things are happening in your during your interview, you're certainly not going to have the best experience. Test your internet connection to make sure it's strong. Be close to the router or a repeater in your house. Make sure that you tell your roommates or your wife and kids or whomever that you're having this discussion to avoid the interaction disruption that could occur. At the end of the day, we're all people and things happen, and we're not going to necessarily mark an interruption as a negative in the process, but it certainly distracts from the conversation, especially if you're having a really solid conversation with someone. You don't want to have any distractions.
So this is my last question for our interview, and that is, what would be your final advice that you would give someone that has earned a virtual interview? So I've just found out, hey, I got an interview. It's going to be online. It's going to be virtual. It's going to be a Zoom interview or whatever the context, whatever the form might be. What advice would you give somebody right out of the gate?
Well, I think we talked about a lot of the tips prior to, but I would say the only advice that I always let everyone, again, aside from being prepared, because that's most important, I think the most, what did they say? That the language that speaks the most is a smile. Everyone can smile, and everyone understands that when you smile, that you're generally in a good mood, unless you're doing a creepy smile, I guess. But come to the interview prepared, excited, calm. I think a lot of times people overthink this process, and I know interviews can be very nerve-wracking. You don't want to make a mistake. What if I say the wrong thing? These things will derail your interview experience. Just embrace it, enjoy it, be you, because the company wants to see who they're talking to, and they don't necessarily want to just see a robot that has no flaws. I think everyone wants to have the experience be successful, and I do know that it's a selection process, and you can only do the best you possibly can. And just, I think if you just enjoy the moment and enjoy the experience, you're going to get so much out of it. Regardless if you get the job or not, every time you get to interact with a company, you're leaving an impression. So what that impression is that for the job that you're currently looking for today, it may, hopefully, if you're taking some of these tips and putting into action, but it also might mean that you're someone they look at in the future. I can't tell you how many times, Jay, that we've interviewed someone for a role only to say, you know what, that person's not just, they're not ready for this role just yet, but man, we have a role coming up in 3 months from now that I know they're going to be great for. So, I think if you have that mindset that yes, you're interviewing for the role today, but you're also interviewing for an opportunity for the future and to show the impression you're making with an organization, you're going to get so much out of it. And I would highly encourage everyone to do, regardless of how great an interview went, thought of, or maybe how poorly an interview went. Always follow up with a message to the people you spoke with, thanking them for your time, recapping your conversation, and make it personalized, individualized for the person to end the conversation you had.
And so in many cases, when you're interviewing certainly for that position, but a lot of candidates might be underestimating the possibility that they might simply be introducing themselves to that company. And that introduction through that interview could lead to opportunities that are beyond just this specific opportunity that they might be interviewing for.
Absolutely. And I mean, here's the other secret, Jay. As much as we want to hire you for our company as well, if we have an opportunity, we're gonna hire you. But if we found if we had multiple candidates and we made a different selection, guess what? I talked to, in Orange County, I think I talked to the top 15 employers with the largest staff in Orange County, and then obviously around the world as well, globally. We're connected with so many companies, and we talk. When we find a great candidate that we weren't able to hire, we're doing our best to make that connection, because that's what we do. My job is to find opportunities and careers for people. Now, I'd love to find the role at Ingram Micro. That's what I'm here to do. And my team is there to do it as well. But if I can find an opportunity with another company as well that I value and I think would be a great opportunity as well, of course we're gonna connect you. And so that's why you really need to take that seriously in the discussion you have, because you leave a long-lasting impression with somebody. And that the other cliche, right, or not cliche, but the line you hear all the time is, there's only one first impression. You only get one time to make a first impression. So you want to do your best to put your best foot forward every time you have an interaction with a company.
Oh, that's great. Greg, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk with us. I think we do have time for one or two questions from our audience. Rosie, do we have a question for Greg from our audience?
Yes, our question comes from Naomi in La Habra. She asks, when is too soon to follow up after an interview?
Hi, Naomi. It's great to get that, because I don't think there's any time limit. If you wait too long, I think that's probably a negative, because as more time goes by, the more and more, there's more interruptions as through a distraction. So as soon as you're able to follow up, I would follow up the day of your interview, or maybe the next morning. Get some time to think about all of the questions, look back at your notes, and really follow up with a thorough email or even letter, or however you want to follow up. But I would do it, within 24 hours. It would probably be my advice, because I love it when I get that message, the individual message from someone that came in to interview, thanking me for taking the time, summarizing the experience they had, talking about, the different questions that were asked, and then also making sure that either myself or whoever was interviewing the person understood why they feel they would be a great fit for the organization based on the conversation they had. That's why I want to make sure you follow up with individual, personalized follow-up messages. Because the other thing is, if you send one generic message to everyone, guess what? We all talk to each other. We have follow-up interview. We have a follow-up discussion with all of the interviewers, talking about the candidates we interviewed. And sometimes it comes up that, hey, I got the same message. It wasn't customized, it wasn't personalized. And not to say that that will derail, but it just shows you didn't take the time to follow up when you did take the time to interview, and then also realize that these individuals who are busy schedules as well took the time to meet with you. So the least thing you can do is just make sure you're sending a message that that relates to the conversation you had with each person.
Well, that's great. I think we have time for maybe one more question. Rosie, do we have one final question for Greg from our audience?
Yes, and it comes from Brandon in Chino. He asked, what advice do you have for those that are graduating during these uncertain times, and how can they stay motivated during their job search?
I'm an eternal optimist, and I think that's motivation in itself. It's the mindset that things will always be better or get better. My mom always tells me, Greg, the best is yet to come. She says it all the time, and it's a joke now because she always says it, but that's my mindset, right? We're facing a challenging time, no doubt about it. But this time is not necessarily different than any other time when our country or the world has faced difficult situations. So, my advice to someone graduating today is, number one, never waste a crisis or never waste an opportunity in a crisis, right? Keep a sharp mindset. So what does that mean? Maintain your exercise, maintain your research, maintain your reading, maintain your connections, because that will get you through this difficult situation, and keep your mind sharp and focused, and knowing that there's better to come. But also stay hungry. Don't just assume that because you apply to a role, companies will get back to you. And I've talked about this on other shows, Jay, is really just making sure that when you apply to a role, find somebody in that company that's doing that position, whether it's on LinkedIn or another avenue, and maybe see if you can connect with them. Have an impromptu conversation like we're having here. They may at most say no, but what if they say yes? And that's another connection into an organization that you have. The more connections you have, the better chances you have on receiving an interview, the better chances you have, especially if people at the company know who you are, what you're capable of, your skill set, what you studied in school, some of the projects you interacted with. Maybe they know your professors. That goes a long way, because those are informal references that will certainly potentially make you the leading candidate if you have two candidates equally skilled, same scores on the interviews, but at the end of the day, someone can vouch that, wow, this person is certainly someone that's going to bring value to our organization. That could be the decision maker. So that's what I would say to someone in this environment now. Now, I'm going to date myself, but I graduated in 2002. So when I graduated, we just had 9/11. We just had the .com bust. And I graduated with a degree in information management and technology. So my skill set was at a time where the skill set it wasn't required. There were no companies in technology hiring. I was faced with a very similar scenario where here I am, I just have my 4-year degree in information technology, and there are 0 technology jobs. In fact, there was more unemployed technologists than I can imagine back then. I was living in Raleigh, North Carolina. And so I could easily have said, you know what, this is not going to work for me, give up, do something else. But I stuck with it. I kept training, I kept skilling myself, meaning I kept taking, or never stopped learning new technologies, just so and viewed at the same level of maybe someone that has years of experience more than I do. So it's kind of like with athletes, right? So how do you continue to be a world-class athlete? It's about training. It's about constantly pushing yourself to be better than you are today. and helping others as well be successful. So the same thing is true for world-class athletes. The same thing is true for someone looking for a job and being a world-class employee or starting a company. That drive is what's going to make you successful.
That's great, Greg. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insights around the talent acquisition space. A lot of our viewers who watch this particular episode will be really glued to their seats to learn more about how to succeed in this virtual interviewing session. So thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
I think that's about all the time we have for today's show. Join us each episode as we bring you relevant topics to guide your thinking and behaviors. I'm Jay Barbuto, and on behalf of the Center for Leadership at Cal State Fullerton, we'll see you next time right here on the Leadership Voice.